Since I intend to make a criticism, I should also make a confession. A few years ago, I sought to understand sorrow by making it the subject of work. This had a curious and quite unexpected consequence. My work on sorrow often banished it, so that there were days when the burden was almost entirely lifted by the study of the burden, when my happiness at the activity of thought dispelled my unhappiness at the object of thought. Perhaps it is impossible to toil unhappily when one's toil has the aspect of a calling. When I read Kafka or Beckett, I sometimes wonder whether any man who could write so plentifully and so gorgeously could really have lived so miserably. And I feel like I have been vouchsafed a saving secret. One way of forgetting the reason for a monument, or of mastering it, is to throw oneself into the creation of a monument. Pain becomes your partner. You take meetings with melancholy. The multiplicity of the meanings of your grief delights you. Ideas and forms and images and devices swim in your head until the confrontation with what has been taken away from you becomes itself an experience of fullness. There are moments when you may even regard yourself a traitor to sorrow. Now, I do not mean to call them traitors to sorrow, but I must say that the architects in the aftermath of September 11th have been altogether too avid. The perplexity at ground zero is not primarily an architectural perplexity. The theme of monument and memory is not exclusively or even mainly an architectural theme. But the New York Times Sunday magazine proclaimed a few weeks ago that, quote, "Now is the time for New York to express its ambition through architecture and reclaim its place as a visionary city." The magazine presented a series of proposals for Lower Manhattan that, in the words of the paper's architecture critic, will bring New York, quote, "in step with the level of architectural ambition in Vienna, Tokyo, Rotterdam, and many other cities overseas," close quote. The architecture of New York, he contended, is presently characterized by, quote, "an intolerance for the progressive ideas that have regenerated many cityscapes overseas." I do not doubt that he is correct, but there is something a little grotesque in the interpretation of ground zero as a lucky break for art, as the opportunity for the advancement of a particular aesthetic cause. Many of the proposals that were presented are clever, but cleverness is an inadequate response to suffering. The only design in which I myself can detect anything commemorative, anything disturbing, any universally legible allusion to the fate of the World Trade Center is Peter Eisenman's proposal for 3 crushed office towers on West Street. It is fascinating, I suppose, that the inverted skyscrapers that Rem Koolhaas would build on West Street represent, quote, "a critique of the Cartesian grid," close quote. But the Cartesian grid is not really the villain of this story. At least the developers do not disguise their own designs upon the site as an intervention in the history of rationalism. Lower Manhattan must not be transformed into a vast mausoleum, obviously, but neither must it be transformed into a theme park for advanced architectural taste. In most of the designs that I have seen, I find mainly a careerist lightness, a purely professional articulateness, a mechanical rehearsal of established styles uninflected by an experience of horror or a reflection on life. It is worth recalling that the association of architecture with death is an old one. Indeed, that it takes us back to the very beginnings of the art. In the words of one historian, quote, "The earliest surviving structures that we can recognize as architecture were funerary monuments. What characterized the cairns and the barons and the dolmens of the Neolithic period, and the mausolea of classical antiquity, and the martyria and the church monuments of the Christian civilization of Europe, and the flamboyant funerary structures of the 19th century, was a conception of mortality, or more precisely, a conception of immortality, of a religious or a secular glory. The afterlife of kings and saints and heroes and ordinary men and women could be read from these monuments. They illustrated a religious or philosophical program, which is to say, a meditation on the significance of life. The spiritual challenge at ground zero is plainly much greater than the architectural challenge. Now, American society is not animated by a single religious or philosophical program. An architectural monument at ground zero must speak to people of many faiths and to people of no faith. Modern tombs, Henry James once observed, are a skeptical affair. But the variousness of American beliefs is not a reason to expel the question of belief from the site. Ground zero is a spiritual opportunity before it is an artistic opportunity. For this reason, I share the view of those who insist that the only fitting monument at ground zero is a big hole in the ground. In America, we are a world of worldviews, and a void may hold both godfulness and godlessness, certainty and doubt, anger and hope.